guest joining us for our final panel of the morning, Dr. Joy Voss, Professor of Education at St. Louis University. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.
And we also have Cyndy Vincent, who is a teacher in special education at the Lindbergh School District. And Cyndy, thank you for joining us.
I'm glad to be here.
Special education, let's do some definition of terms, because that sounds like a very broad category. So what exactly is special ed?
Well, special ed is really defined by our major law, which is the IDEA law, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And that really began the formalized aspects of special education. So in special ed, we have 13 categories of students' disabilities who have to qualify for a special education diagnosis, and then some other words that you'll hear us talking about are the IEP, which is the Individualized Educational Plan, and that is what sets out the student's educational plan, and that's what we have to follow in order to follow all the laws of the major law, which is the IDEA law.
And the 13 disabilities, the 13 different categories you talked about, physical disabilities, mental disabilities, that covers everything.
Yes, it does. The major group of students that we work with are students who have learning disabilities, and that entails students with speaking, reading, writing, and math. I won't go through all of them, but the major one is the learning disabilities, and then probably about 20% of students with special ed have speech and language issues. About 7 to 10% have autism, and 7 to 10% have emotional disturbances.
So when a student qualifies, what happens? What does that mean to the student?
Well, it means that they get an IEP, an individualized educational plan, and then we determine some level of special education. And so this can be anywhere from what we call total inclusion, which would be spending all of their time in regular education, and the special educator would come into their regular education classroom, or it could be on a continuum of 0 to 100. They could spend anywhere from 100% of their time in a different school with a special education school. So that's part of the team's decision, is to figure out what the needs are, how much special education do they require, and how are we going to provide that special education.
And Dr. Joy Voss is an educator of educators. This, again, makes your job very interesting because you have so many different things to cover.
Yes, we do. And one of the things that we have to give Cyndy credit as a special educator, it is more than just an IEP. It is more than just services in the classroom. They have to be a facilitator, a leader in our community. They're a leader in the school, help supporting all the educators and all the families. So it is multiple hats, as we would say.
So true.
As an educator, it is our job to make sure that our students are getting the experience with these quality educators. They should not just be hearing theory. Of course, theory is wonderful, as we could say, but they need to actually hear the words that these teachers are saying and how they are being so progressive and so into relationships with students, which is so important. They have to understand that it is more than just going in and teaching a strategy. You have to know each child individually and how to meet those needs. We also have to present this to all of our educators, not just our special educators, our general ed teachers. Teachers are getting certification in elementary, middle school, secondary. They will be the ones that will be helping and facilitating and collaborating with the special ed teacher, the speech pathologist, the occupational therapist, the physical therapist. And so it is a whole collaboration that we have to work together.
Right. And so we, as special educators, can either work in these, and it's a very limited amount of students these days who are going to be in a special education school. Most of the students are going to be in their regular home schools, receiving services within the general education classroom, or some of them in a resource room. So about 80% of the students are spending 80% or more of their time in general education. classrooms, and the special educator is either going into those classrooms in a team teaching model, which is, I'm sure, what Joy works with a lot, or they're in a resource room where they're with that special educator for either one period of the day or several periods, depending on what the student's needs are.
But one of the things that Cyndy and I were talking about earlier is there is actually a shortage of special ed teachers, quality special ed teachers. So we have to figure out a way to grow our own in St. Louis and in the rural area of Missouri. And many universities are looking at programs. One of the things that we do at St. Louis University is our Billiken Teacher Corps. So we have made a service commitment to the Catholic schools in the urban area, and we have a cohort of 8 students who get a master's program for free, and they live in a community together. And we are going to have our first special ed teacher for the Catholic schools going through the Billiken Teacher Corps.
That's excellent.
Yes.
Now, the attitudes about special education have also dramatically changed in the fairly recent past, up until now. The idea of separating students out of class used to be de rigueur. It no longer is the goal, right?
No, I think, well, IDEA, which is the special education law, really tells us that we need to include students to the maximum amount possible. And one of the areas that really helps us with this is technology. Technology and what we call assistive technology, which are devices that help the special ed students access the general education curriculum. There's so much of that now that really it helps them look more like their regular ed peers, because everybody has devices these days. So if a student is having trouble reading and they need a text-to-speech assistance, special ed or an assistive technology device to help with that, they don't look too much different than the student sitting next to them with a computer. So we have so many applications, computer applications and devices that allow students to access the general ed curriculum in ways that we couldn't do it before.
And you also see teams of educators who are actually using technology to communicate with each other. So if Tommy was in your class today,
right,
you would be communicating with his other teachers.
Absolutely. There's so much of that goes on. I think I spend probably 30% of my day on the computer communicating with other teachers, parents, and outside agencies. So we spend a lot of our time in communication. And you mentioned that communication piece, which is so vital for special educators and regular educators to understand the special education students' needs and the different strategies that we have to work with to teach them to access the general education environment.
Right, and you talked about them looking like the other students. There also seems to me that there would be a component to diminishing bullying, because the more these kids are around, the more the other kids interact with them, and the more he's just another kid in class instead of the kid who goes off to the other place in the morning.
And I think you've mentioned one of the main reasons that parents want their students included is because, and one of the great benefits of inclusion is that it helps students understand all types of individuals. And that goes both ways. It helps our special ed students learn how to interact with others, and it helps students without disabilities understand that although people are different, they all have value and things to bring to the table.
And Dr. Voss, Cyndy mentioned technology and its role in increasing these abilities of students who have one disability or another. We just saw, unfortunately, we lost Stephen Hawking over the last couple of weeks. Yes. And he's a man that the technology, we got very lucky because the technology evolved as he needed new ways to communicate. So are we seeing the same things overall in education, where as difficulties present themselves, the technology to fix those, to bridge those gaps is presenting itself as well? Yes,
it's correct. So there is so much out there for our kids, but we have to decide what is the best thing for our kids. So one of the things that we believe in is that we as special educators have to have strategies. Okay, so you might have a child who does not want to communicate to his peers in the classroom. So why not let them use their phone, which has an app on it, which allows them to speak and give his opinion in the classroom. Why does it have to be a method of just communicating with your voice? So, and the kids have been acclimated, and they are very used to having. Here's the key thing that we have to remember. We're not here to provide an equal education for everyone. We have to provide an equitable education for everybody. If I need to have a device to help me with my augmented communication, I should have that device. If I need a device to help me with my writing, then I need to have that device. Whatever I need, we need to help support and figure out what's the best tool for that child to be successful.
So many of our strategies are connected to assistive technology, but we also have strategies that are evidence-based that we teach students so that they can access the regular ed curriculum in a better way. So for example, part of our job as special educators is teaching strategies such as writing strategies, reading strategies. I myself am a speech and language pathologist, and I teach students how to communicate more effectively in a social environment. So by teaching them these strategies, we help them access the general ed curriculum and interact with their peers in a more effective manner. And that levels the playing field so that they can be more successful when they are moving to the next level.
Enjoy that exposure to kids in regular ed, to kids who are in special education. Do you feel like 10 years from now, you won't have as much of a difficulty finding people who are going to want to be those special educators later on?
Well, hopefully we're giving all of the educators the tools.
Sure.
That's the key. And that's what we believe in very much at St. Louis University. It's not just the special ed teacher needs this support. It's all educators need to know this knowledge, and they need to be exposed to it. So as we were talking about technology and evidence-based strategies, the key is all of our students need to be aware of all these evidence-based strategies, and they need to go out and practice it. And we've been very blessed here in the Lindbergh School District. For example, right now I have over 10 practicum students in special ed that are out in the elementary schools and hearing the words from our educators, getting these situations. You can't read a textbook on classroom organization and management. What are you going to do? There's no recipe, as I say every day to my students. You have to experience it and know that sometimes you will have to make mistakes, but guess what? We learn from those mistakes.
Well, go ahead.
I was going to say, one thing that we have found in having special educators in the regular ed classrooms, and when teachers are team teaching in such a fashion, they teach to everyone. So many of the, quote, regular ed students benefit from learning those strategies just as much as the, quote, special ed students do, because I think there's a much better understanding now about learning styles and in all of education, and so how important it is to teach to students learning styles, whether they have a special education diagnosis.